Bonnie Lane's birthday. I'll turn 41. Now, some people might think that's old. Some people might think that's young. I get it. But for me, 41 represents a really unique threshold. My father died when he was 40. So at this point, I have outlived my father. Now, my sisters, I have two older sisters, and as they or their spouses and myself, as we've been moving towards this threshold, we have shared a common experience, a kind of feeling of being overwhelmed with the apprehension, a bit of awe, trying to imagine life after 40. Now, our mother is still alive, but for whatever reason, there is something about losing a parent at a certain age that becomes a moment that we could not imagine, or I guess we've wondered if we would make it to that age or further. As this threshold nears, and especially amongst the poignant awareness of loss during the global pandemic, and the more perceptible indicators that we are all seeing of a warming planet, the fragility and mystery of a lifespan has been particularly on my mind. Now, because of my father's illness and death, I've reflected pretty much my whole life on death and dying. And this reflection has provided me with a compass that I'd like to share with you today. It's a lot of what has brought me into ministry in the first place, but this is a compass not necessarily about how to grieve, but it's a compass for how to live and how to love. Now, in order to orient you to this compass, I'm going to need to introduce you to my dad. The only way you're going to get to know him is through stories. And these stories are pretty scarce because the way that we as a family, like so many in the Midwest, dealt with death was that we just didn't talk about it. The dead was not spoken about, maybe sometimes, but very, very briefly. And it's a shame because Rick Schaefer really has some gifts to share. Now, I want to just say that this is a story of loss of a beloved, of a loved one, a best friend. It is not normative. There are all kinds of losses. There are losses where we take a deep breath, in some cases of relief after a death. We shouldn't feel guilty about that. That's okay. There are losses that feel a particular kind of strain because there's something left unfinished, unresolved, a tension, an argument, that last conversation that never happened. So I share this knowing that there are many kinds of ways and experiences of loss. But this is mine with this particular person in my life. Now, my dad was raised on a farm just outside of Mitchell, South Dakota. When he was 6, he moved to the Black Hills of South Dakota. My grandfather, Julius, got a job that he absolutely hated in the Homestake gold mine. But this is where my dad developed a relationship with the land, which he passed down to me and has become so much a part of who I am and how I am. This is from my dad's sister, my Aunt Lucy. The closest neighbor in the Black Hills was an old bachelor who lived about a quarter mile up the road. We always just called him the old bachelor. I never knew his name. He sure liked your dad. He taught him a lot about nature. He told him stories about the Black Hills. He taught him which plants, seeds, and nuts were edible and how to trap animals. The old bachelor didn't have electricity. So your grandfather, Julius, rigged up some kind of light using a car battery. When the battery needed charging, your dad would take his wagon over with a good battery and bring the dead battery back home to be recharged. Now, I remember once when we were all camping in the Black Hills with your family, and your dad used his skills that he'd learned from the old bachelor to make a trap and trapped a chipmunk. He let it go, but he wanted you kids to have the experience of seeing it up close. I love that memory of the chipmunk. Oh my goodness, it was so amazing. We were taught respect for animals from the moment we could move. That was part of how I was brought up. From my mom, I was overdue with your sister Sherry, and we tried to put up a Christmas tree. It was a crooked little tree and it tipped over. I couldn't help because every time I tried, my pregnant belly would just hit it over again. Dad solved the problem by nailing the stand to the floor through the carpet. In addition to his innovation and problem solving, his tinkering in the garage, his making of all kinds of things, my dad was adventurous. He drove a triple semi-rig for UPS at night. Those are the ones with like the 3 semis. He worked hard and he played hard, and us kids did all of it with him. He never left us behind. I especially remember a trip to California. We had an RV at that time, and I remember the smell of burning brakes as we descended into a cove that had a sign that said, "Do not bring an RV down this road, it's not advised." We knew we were going to burn up the brakes on the way down. He knew that, but he'd already scoped out a place to get them fixed, and he wasn't going to miss the opportunity to share tide pools with us, to share what it was to see the ocean and then to see below the surface the life that was there. There was a time where we went camping in Glacier National Park, and they warned us that there was grizzly activity in the northern part of the park and to stay away from these specific campgrounds. Well, at that time, we didn't have the RV. We just had a little orange tent. I think I was 2, my sisters were 6 and 8. And that's, where we went. Of course, we went camping there to see the grizzly bears. So we went to the northern part of the park. This was just how we lived. But most of all, I remember the way my dad treated me. He treated me like a person, not a child. When we traveled, he taught me things. I knew how to read mile markers and what they meant. I knew how to operate a CB radio. I knew his name was Blue Jeans and my mom's name was Blue Bunny and my grandpa's name was Avocado. I assisted with tools, with car maintenance, whatever was needed. I was brought along and shown things that perhaps weren't typical for a girl. It didn't matter. I was treated as a person, not a gender. Now, the most important thing my dad taught me was about discipline. When I was naughty fairly frequently, he would tell me to go to the closet and get the belt. And then he would sit me down and he would have me hold the belt while he told me a story about how he would be hit as a child with a belt, how he was beat at school with a rubber hose. He told me how much he hated those lashings. He told me that he would never hit one of his kids. He would never do that, even if we were naughty, but that we had to understand that when we did something bad, that bad choices had consequences. And so I had to tell him that I was sorry. And I had to tell him what I would do different the next time around, all while holding the belt that I named Snaky. He told me his own stories, the regrets he had as a child, the things that he did that he couldn't undo. They still weighed heavy on his heart so many years later. He taught me about doing the right thing, to have a moral compass, to have character, and to live without those regrets. Overall, my dad was pretty ordinary. You'll never read about him in a history book, but he was an extraordinary father. At the age of 37, he was diagnosed with colon cancer. Whew. And even as the diagnosis got more complicated and metastasized, it was inoperable. We went into hospice. We always thought a miracle was coming at any moment. From my mom, much has been told and discussed about Dad dying of cancer too young and how he suffered. But the main thing for us to remember is he fought to the end because he didn't want to leave his kids. Even after all of this, it came as a surprise to all of us the day that he slipped into a coma. And 2 days later, when he was 40 years old, his body gave out and he died. Now, I tell this story of my father not to leave you bereft or inflict my loss upon you. And I just always give myself permission to cry. Usually it works and then I don't cry, but I think showing emotion to one another, to share our hearts is one of the greatest gifts we can give. So I'm not embarrassed that I'm crying, but hopefully it gives you permission to feel. So I'm not trying to inflict that upon you. I just want to share that depth of loss because I want you to take this next part of the message seriously. Because if you have or are or will feel shattered, if the ambiguous grief of the last few years of the pandemic is taking a serious toll on your heart, and some days you can't seem to catch your breath, I truly believe that this message is for you. That although it is a journey, and we all must journey through it, and every journey is unique, that it is possible that the depth of loss can open you to new depths of living and loving. Because I tried many things to come to terms with my dad's death. I tried to be strong. I strived for perfection, thinking about a heaven and like I could only be perfect, I would see my dad again. I tried to find an explanation, to explain what had happened. Why had he died? Well, I was brought up in a church that linked death and suffering to punishment. And some people actually wondered out loud if perhaps my father had sinned and was being punished. A questionable woman that he dated as a young man was brought up several times. Or perhaps it was just because he didn't go to the doctor early enough, that it was his fault that he didn't get checked out when he wasn't feeling well. I know that all of these are ways to explain why bad things happen to good people. I know that we want to believe these explanations, but for me, they just kept falling short. There just wasn't an explanation for why this happened. My dad was good. He was really great. I mean, if this was the case, if this was punishment, there was a lot of bad dads out there. I mean, I've always wondered, like, how could this be? Why would it be him? So not only did these responses fail me, they broke me. The longer I tried to get over it with strength or tried to be perfect or to carry guilt and shame, perhaps it was my fault. Maybe I was the one who was naughty. It was like holding death at bay, and it was exhausting. But how do you accept this kind of pain in the world? How do you just accept it as a part of life? Poet David White puts it this way: to love is courageous because for everyone we love, either I will say goodbye to you or you will say goodbye to me. And when grief remains raw as it was for me, as I tried to control it or rationalize it or hold it, there just wasn't enough courage in the world to make me want to be in a loving relationship with anyone, because I never wanted to hurt that bad again. So that's how I lived for a long time. And then a wise and loving mentor asked me one day, have you ever considered that your father's life was complete? And what do you mean by complete? I asked. I mean, he died young. His life wasn't complete yet. Well, she said, no matter how long someone lives, this is a common grief experience. We just want one more day, one more hour, one more conversation. He has died. His form as Rick Schaefer is no longer, and we can't bring him back. So technically his life is complete. I'd always thought of it from a place of scarcity. He had, died young and it wasn't complete. There was still more life to live. But thinking that way always made me think about what wasn't there and kept me from acknowledging what was there. These stories, these memories. Maybe his life was complete. I mean, there's nothing we can do to bring someone back. There's all this love that they gave. What is time versus quantity? Quality? How do we hold it all? Once I started thinking of my father's life as complete, I began to understand that there was a whole nother chapter. And my mentor asked me, after I said, I think I can understand this. I think I can believe that a life can be complete, even if it feels like it was too young or too short. And she said, okay, well then this is the next step. How will they walk with you now? I'd never thought of that. I'd never thought of the way that my father is a part of me, in my DNA, that in the stories I share, in the way I am, in the moral compass I have, in the way that I teach others to live with the land, that he is a part of me. And I am filled with the love, an eternal love. I mean, my dad and I never argue. We never get into fights. I am loved as much now as I was when he died. And so perhaps because I lost my dad when I was 9 years old, that I now understand eternal love in a different way, that I know that when I soften myself, when I live into understanding that death happens and a life can be complete, now I walk with my dad. I walk with him all the time. It was a way of changing my thinking that allowed me to feel a different kind of presence. This is why my prayers often remind us to honor ancestors, petitioning them for help and guidance and thanking them for being with us. We do not worship our ancestors, we bring them with us. As poet Alice Walker writes, to acknowledge our ancestors means we are aware that we did not create ourselves. So this is my compass. What I do is not just for me. It is a continuation of my father, Richard. It is my grandmother, Gertrude, Alvina, my great-grandmothers. They are always with me. It has provoked me to think now like a future ancestor. What will I leave behind for others to know eternal love? After living in scarcity, lamenting that my father's life was cut short, raging in anger about the loneliness and the love lost, and cutting off all the love that was around me, I spent much of my life grasping for answers and sitting in shame. I now understand that a life can be complete. This long reflection on death and dying has allowed me to journey to know what it means to be human, to relish moments of grace, and to love without end. Amen. If we could stop the recording at this time,